Lara Croft's archaeological adventures have been around for quite some time. If you're a fan of any of the previous Tomb Raider games, you've probably already conquered this reboot in the Tomb Raider Definitive Edition. Fortunately, this is one of those games that you can spend hours just looking at how well made it is. To be honest, we did that quite a bit as well also. Now, this shot is a great example of the effects within Tomb Raider. For instance, there are the obvious fire particles. If you look closely when a camera tilts up, you'll notice some nice smoke effects in there. Not too much, but it's just one of those things that you'd really notice more if it's not there than when it is. And that doesn't count the dynamic lighting with some nice volumetrics from the flashlights the bad guys are holding, or even if you look closely on the right-hand side, there's even some claw simulations going on inside that little wooden area just off the path. You may not have noticed it with all of the other effects in that last shot, but it's really nice to see that the lush vegetation that's used to engross you within the jungle environment is even driven by wind fields. Notice here how the grass on the left side and the bush on the right side really nicely swaying in the wind. Speaking of things blowing in the wind, we were really impressed with Lara's dynamic hair and how it flowed in the wind. This is actually Lara's idle animation, but even when she's standing still, you can see how the individual strands of her hair are being blown around. Something that stood out to us is a really nice added touch were the torch flames. Notice here that the torch provides some nice dynamic lighting in the cave, but it's emitting some little particles into the air as well as having some bigger ones dropping periodically to help sell that the flame itself is really alive. Once again, these are little details that you'd probably notice a lot more if they were missing, but when they are there, they really help add to the realism of the environment. Of course, we all know that it isn't actually a real world in Tomb Raider, but even in that regard, little details like these drops of water on the lens after splashing around in some water, really nice ways of creating an immersive world that looks about as realistic as you can expect in current generation games. The blood on the screen is used as a health meter of sorts, and the game devs did a great job of not letting that health meter interfere with other lens effects. So if you look closely here, you'll see that not only is the blood on the screen from the long fall we just took off the ledge, but there's also some water spots on the lens as well. While this is definitely an extremely solid game, every game is bound to have some things that could be improved, and Tomb Raider certainly is no different. So here's a great example of an issue that we found where the animations were causing some low poly areas to deform oddly. Right here you can clearly see how Lara's arms almost look to bend backwards as she's pulling another character in this cutscene. Granted, sometimes human arms can look a little funny in real life when you're pulling heavy objects, but if you watch her right shoulder in these next shots, especially here where she's close up, you can really see some faceting in that geometry, some strange deformations there. If you've seen any videos or gameplay footage from Tomb Raider online up to this point, chances are you've seen this shot. And for good reason, because it's beautifully done. While we would have liked to have seen the fire break up a little more when it hit the top of the cave, instead of colliding with what looks to be a flat plane, if you watch closely and look at the textures on Lara's face, notice how she's got a bunch of dirt and grime on her face, but as soon as she drops underwater and comes back up, that dirt is gone. Of course, as soon as Lara emerges from the scene, all of the blood and dirt that she had on her before is gone as well, washed away in the water. This is incredibly cool attention to detail that can be really easily missed if you're not looking for it. So feel free to go back and watch that again just to see how cool it is. There were actually quite a few of those pseudo cutscenes in Tomb Raider. By that I mean shots that look like cutscenes, but you're actually playing through them. While it might look like a cutscene because of the more cinematic style camera angles, we're actually playing through this. And sometimes some of those angles in the camera animations were a little tough to control. So for example, it's kind of tough to know if we should be pushing the control stick up when the camera flips around to be in a different angle like this. But really, given the style of game that Tomb Raider is, for the most part, we actually liked this style of gameplay that helped you feel like you're playing a movie. Now, throughout most of the shots up to this point, you'll notice that there hasn't been really any HUD graphics. And that's not any editing on our part, that's just how Tomb Raider is. The HUD and graphics are incredibly well done, and for the most part, stay completely out of the way until you need them, like you can see in this shot. But what impressed us most about the interface was how well it's integrated into the game itself. For example, if you pay close attention to the transition when the menu pops up here, because of the way they're designed to be integrated into the environment, it feels like you're never really leaving the game to open menu. You've even got the fire affecting the menu with some nice heat distortion. You've got some parallax in there that occurs with the menu items themselves. Really, really well done. Of course, not all of the menus are that way, but even when they're not integrated in, they still have a very consistent and clean feel, as you can see here. While we're looking at the interface design, we really love the attention to detail that went into the flashback type shots that were done on a camcorder. So this is video footage that Lara is watching on a handheld camcorder, and it's used just to give some backstory for the game. Obviously, you see the timecode updating as the video is playing, but watch the battery number on the top left, and then as soon as that updates, look at the number just under the timecode. These could have easily been left to be static numbers that don't update, or even numbers that update at the same time, but they are independently updating, and that really helps add to the believability that this is actually something we're watching through a camcorder. These next few shots show some of the ups and downs of texturing in Tomb Raider. So notice the look of the rock face that Lara is climbing up. That particular texture means that you can climb the rock. Now, if you think about this, there's a lot of different environments in Tomb Raider. So you need to have this particular type of texture look different enough that it can fit within all of the various environments, but similar enough that the player will be able to recognize it as something they can climb. It's actually not that easy to achieve. Now, this particular shot is outside in the jungle, but then notice the differences in the texture when you find the same climbable rock face inside a cave. If you look closely, they're different and they fit into the environment around them, but they still look very similar and are easily recognizable as something that Lara can climb. Unfortunately, not all of the environment textures were done that well, and there were a few areas we noticed with some really flat-looking textures. Notice the bones on the floor are really flat because all they are textures, and there wasn't any sort of geometry to help with that. Now, if you compare the bones on that floor with the bones on the ground in this shot, you can tell there's a really big difference thanks to some actual geometry scattered about, so it doesn't look quite as flat. Oh yeah, and pay close attention to the shadow when the lightning flashes. Did you see that? It's a great example of how the lighting in Tomb Raider is used to help build emotion in the game. In this case, that emotion is fear of whatever monster that shadow belongs to. As you can tell from the numbers we gave in this review, the definitive edition of Tomb Raider is a very solid game. The technical issues that we did find were few, far between, and overall didn't take away from how fun this game is to play.